Welcome back to the future of figure skating. My name's Anna Keller, and my guest today is Evan Bates. Evan is an American ice dancer, and with his partner Madison Chock, is the three-time and reigning world champion in ice dance. He's also a four-time Olympian and gold medalist in the team event from Beijing. In 2022, Evan was elected by his peers to be the first ice dance representative to the ISU Athletes Commission. I spoke to Evan about his experience as a representative so far and his hopes for the Athletes Commission in the future.
Evan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'm excited to get to talk with you.
Thank you for having me.
So I am really interested in your experience has been like with the ISU Athletes Commission. My understanding is that you were elected after the 2022 Congress, and so you've been part of it for a few years now. What made you want to do this, and how has it been so far?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. It's been a really positive experience for me. I guess starting with what initially kind of spurred my interest, it came from my experience in Beijing at the Olympics there. We can go into it. It was just, I think, an alternative experience for all of the athletes there, mostly because of the pandemic. But also, I think there was a real movement in our sport after that Olympic experience where there was a real conversation about safeguarding the athletes and prioritizing, the health and the well-being of figure skaters. And so there was some conversation around this athlete representation position. I put my name forward, and then I was elected at the 2022 World Championships by my fellow ice dancers, which was a big honor and something that I was really humbled to represent them. I think it's a very important role, obviously. I take it obviously very seriously, and the work that we've been doing has been exciting, and it's been a positive experience, and excited to talk about it.
That's great. So what kinds of things have you been working on? And maybe if you can say a little bit about what the Athletes Commission's role is sort of within the ISU. It's a relatively new thing, is my understanding, that you're part of this sort of first cohort that is doing it.
Yeah, so the Athletes Commission with the ISU is fairly new, like you said. We are the third iteration of the Athletes Commission. So really it's less than 10 years old. And listening to your previous episode with Elizabeth Ramsey, she was talking about how, they were just celebrating their 50th anniversary with the USOPC Athletes Commission. So I feel encouraged that the ISU has created this Athletes Commission. And so maybe I could just briefly kind of talk about what it is. So we have a representative for each of the disciplines in the ISU, and that includes speed skating as well, right? So we have short track speed skating, long track speed skating, singles and pairs lumped into one representative, and then ice dance and synchronized skating. So the five of us kind of represent the athletes of all the ISU. And we've been together now working for 2 years, and we'll do an annual meeting in person, but we'll hold virtual meetings every month and check in with one another. And we have a lot of conversations about, frankly, how we can serve the athletes better, how we can represent, their rights and grow their rights and include things like safeguarding, which I mentioned, and, creating a path for athletes to transition out of sport into the rest of their life, give them opportunities to succeed off the ice, and so much more. I mean, we have so many conversations about how to grow our sport, how to, boost our audience and our numbers. And, of course, some of that includes revenue and how we might also, the skaters could benefit from that as well. So there's a lot. So Eric Radford is the singles and pairs representative. Natalie Lundquist is our synchronized skating representative. Victor Knock is our short track speed skater, and then Dawa DeVry is our long track speed skater. So it's, people from different countries. We've got Hungary, we've got Netherlands, we've got Sweden, Canada, and the US. And it's been a real real learning experience, just the kind of, the global nature of our sport. is something that I think is inherent when you go to international competitions and you kind of understand that. But then at a governance level, to understand what really goes into, the upper level of decision making and how it affects the skaters has been a real learning experience for me.
What kinds of things have you heard from other athletes? Do people reach out to you as a potential, channel for them to bring forward ideas or complaints? And sort of what are those channels of communication like with the athletes, with the ice dancers?
It's all fair game. And I think it's just really important to be open and to be there and be present and to make yourself accessible to the athletes and have them be comfortable with this athlete representative so that they feel like they have someone they can come talk to and bring an issue up, because I think sometimes it can be daunting to go to, an adult or, somebody who's at that upper level of representation, like maybe a president or a vice president of the ISU who maybe you don't have that kind of rapport with, that you can just approach them with an issue. And so I feel like that's where the athlete representative is super important.
Yeah. I had asked you previously about the athletes meeting that was held recently at the World Championships, and that as an opportunity for people to directly communicate with you. Would you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So that was a big project that the Athletes Commission undertook this year, was hosting an athletes forum. It was the first time ever that we did that. And it took place this year at the Montreal World Championships. It happened after all the events were over, so skaters were done, could relax a little bit, and then we essentially had an open invite to anybody. All 4 disciplines were welcomed, and we got into a room together, and it was actually attended by the president, Jae-Yul Kim, and the managing director, Colin Smith, who both were there. And I found it very encouraging, and quite frankly, just it was so real to have our leadership in the room with all the skaters, and it was very informal, and it was just like a conversation about getting the feedback from the skaters about what they want, what kind of ideas they have, what they see the sport looking like in the future, and I really appreciated that our president and our director are actually asking the skaters themselves for their opinions about what's going on. And so it was great. We had a great attendance. It was almost 50 skaters there. And it was Saturday night, almost 10:30 at night, after all the events were over, when a lot of people want to do some relaxing or some socializing. And I was really encouraged by the number of people that showed up and the conversation that took place.
Yeah, that's really great to have that. And I've seen that there's starting to be a little bit more of that kind of direct contact, but for the athletes and for the coaches, I think they also were having the first coaches meeting for singles and pairs discipline with the technical committee last year as well. And everything that I've heard from athletes and coaches has been yes, please, more of this. So is that seeing that that's something that you want to repeat this year or find other opportunities?
Absolutely. I think that is really the mission of the Athletes Commission, is to amplify the voice of the athletes. And so we did the athletes forum. We also put out year-end surveys to the athletes. And we want to expand on it. We want to do more. So I think we're going to do more in-person meetings and things like that. And I know on the speed skating front, they've also had their own athlete forums. And it's really interesting to see how different the different worlds are. But at the same time, when we're talking about athlete representation, we're talking about athlete rights, there's so much in common.
And so when you're talking about the athletes, I guess part of the question that I have is sort of who do you represent and how widely does that go? Is it, just the athletes that are at the level where they're coming to the World Championship, or when you're putting out a survey, who is that reaching?
So we want to get as big of a reach as we possibly can. I am the ice dance representative, so I try to speak to the ice dancers, but I'll be honest, since I am an active competitor, I have talked to so many single skaters and pair skaters as well. And I find I guess I maybe didn't expect the level of engagement with the skaters that I've really experienced, and so many good ideas and just a real passion for the sport that is uniting all of the athletes together. And I find it really encouraging that now that the Athletes Commission exists and we're doing more of this amplification of the athlete voice, we hear more and more from the skaters, and I feel like the more that we can drive the progress of the sport forward from the skaters, from what the skater needs and wants, then it's going to be the best outcome.
When it comes to sending things out to skaters and like the different channels of communication, do you have a way to directly speak, to the athletes, or does that go through the federations? How does that work?
So that goes through the member federations, and that has been one of the puzzles that the Athletes Commission has been trying to solve, is how do we reach, the most number of athletes possible. It's a little trickier than I think maybe I knew at the outset, just based on security concerns. And, it's not that easy to just get a mass database of every skater in the world and, blast them with an email. So it does go through the member federations. So, I represent the US, so US Figure Skating will send me the year-end survey, and it's the same, on so forth and so on for each of the other countries. And so we're working towards, getting more awareness around this kind of feedback system, and getting just like, a better, what should I say? Sorry, I'm having one of those moments. We're looking to have better, what do you call it?
I mean, just like the connections is part of this, that, if you're going to, I think thinking about, like, I come from doing sort of electoral politics, and so I always think, like, well, who's your constituency? Like,
we're looking for more feedback, and we're looking for, like, a higher feedback rate, basically, so that everyone's getting a chance to say their piece. And the thing I liked about this year's survey was that it was a lot of just text box with like an open-ended, you can type as much as you want, and talk to some of the skaters afterwards, and they were like, I wrote a novel. They were so excited about the opportunity to write as much as they want and share their ideas. And I think it's great. It's not just like a sliding scale of, are you satisfied, medium satisfied, or very satisfied? It's like, hey, what do you think about this? And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear that they're that excited about sharing back. What are you going to use the survey information with, or what kinds of themes have come out of that might be leading to future action?
Well, I think like one of the main goals right now for the ISU is growing the sport, and particularly really tapping into a younger audience and trying to capture new skating fans. And so I think part of the feedback that's come from some of the skaters was they wanted to do some things that are new and fresh. I'll use the backflip example. I think that was driven in large part by the skaters saying, hey, we want to do this. I know it's a safety concern. I know, it's polarizing in some regards, but the athletes wanted to do it, and the poll was taken, and now it's in, and I think that kind of immediate change is something that's really been challenging in our sport for a long time. We don't see a lot of change in our sport that happens quickly. It's really encouraging to see. And I think when we have 4-year quads, it can be hard sometimes to change things leading up to the Olympics. It's uncomfortable for some skaters, but I think finding that right balance of experimenting with new elements, new ideas, new presentation for how we're going to do competitions, the light shows and the in-arena DJs, and getting the crowd engaged in a really meaningful way is also part of, I think, what's going to help our sport grow beyond just those diehard skating fans.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've heard about in some of the Vision 2030 is trying to make it easier for athletes to have the resources that they need to be able to promote themselves, whether that's having, their photo library that can access, or I was really glad to see that they've gone back to posting all of the Grand Prix athletes' videos as individual videos and things like that. But it seems like there's a lot of barriers. We talk about a lot of time about barriers to access to the sport in terms of people being able to watch it, but also even in terms of athletes being able to have access to their own performances to share or use their own image is certainly something that seems very challenging.
Yeah, I do think we're making progress in that regard. I think the ISU Council is certainly thinking about ways to yeah, give the athlete the opportunity to market themselves in a new way. I mean, the rule was just passed this year at Congress, allowing for us to wear branding on our costumes for the first time ever. They're going to allow, basically just give us the trove of photos and videos after the competition that we can post on our social media. And that's really huge. There has been a barrier to that in the past because of rights. And I think that's just like a real important avenue for us to market the skaters, to reach a younger audience. The younger generation is on their phones, they're on social media, they're, watching those clips in bite-sized segments. And so it's not that easy to just stream a 3-hour competition and expect that we're going to just capture a whole bunch of new skating fans. So I think change is being made. It's been really encouraging since I've been on the committee for the last 2 years to see a change in leadership and some real progress being made.
When you're talking about different potential changes, there's also athlete representation on the technical committees. I was curious how much you work with Caitlin Weaver as the representative on the ice dance technical committee, or how those roles overlap or don't.
Yeah, so I have not worked very closely with the technical committee. I am invited to one of their meetings per year, which I usually just do at Congress because we're all in the same place at the same time. But I will say the Ice Dance Technical Committee has done a really good job of looping everybody in over the years. Even before I was an athlete representative, they would regularly hold athlete and coaches meetings at one of the ISU championship events and, do a PowerPoint presentation and float ideas for rule changes or for what rhythms we might be dancing in the future. And so it's a little bit of a separate thing between the Athletes Commission and the Technical Committee, but I think the work that they're doing and the way that they're also including an athlete representative on their committee is huge. And I think like those people are doing a lot of work and spending a lot of time, and frankly, it's a volunteer position, and they spend probably as much time as what would require of a full-time job. And it's because of the love of the sport. And that's what's really struck me a lot about just my engagement with the ISU, which has been new for me, but I've been interacting with more of these ISU office holders. And like the uniting factor is that everybody loves skating. Everybody has had a real passion for this, and it's wonderful.
You are also very involved. I mean, like you said, the coming out of 2022 and the Beijing Olympics, that you are also involved with advocacy for yourself and your teammates around the team event and Olympic medal, and then around some of the anti-doping rules. And so I'm sort of curious about how you felt like your role in sort of activism in that space as a Team USA athlete, and then your role with the ISU did or didn't overlap as you've been working for the last 2 years. And congratulations on finally getting that Olympic medal.
Thank you. I will say, like, I do think that was a real catalyst, and like the desire to get involved at a different level beyond just being an athlete. I think it was really difficult to experience what happened in Beijing, not from my own point of view in the sense that, our team was delayed a medal, but in the sense of caring for an athlete and what an athlete might be going through. And I think there's so much work to be done still in this regard, but I'm encouraged by the progress that has been made in the last 2 years, but a lot of work to be done in safeguarding athletes. And I think over the last couple of years, I've really seen a change. And I don't think it's just since being on the committee, but it just being an athlete in the system for a number of years. And what's happening now, I think, is a lot more education, a lot more security in mind, a lot of background. We do a background check every year before the season starts. We do e-learning every single year about, athlete safety, what goes into creating a good environment at the ice rink, and just being like a contributing member of, the larger skating world, I think is so important. Um, and I think it comes down to like a question of what is sport? What is the meaning of sport? I mean, it's so deep, but like, what are we really looking for in sport? Is it just a gold medal? Are we just looking to win and, the ends justify the means? I certainly don't think so. And I don't think the majority think so. I think it's really about developing human beings to have skills that they'll take beyond their athletic career, and they'll go on and they'll have fulfilling lives. And I feel really passionately about that is really the purpose of sport. And so anything that we can do to bolster that experience for our young athletes is, I think, what the mission should be.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things you mentioned, just young athletes, and that's one of the things that I've thought a lot about with the questions around representation, is that so many of the athletes that are competitive at a high level in figure skating are, they may be under 18, or they're, in general have not had a huge amount of outside experience, that maybe have to be advocating for themselves. Plus, it's a judged sport, and all of the other things that go against being able to have that kind of voice. And so I'm curious what kinds of conversations you feel like should be happening, maybe at a younger age, or in terms of developing, athletes who feel comfortable and safe advocating for what they need.
I'm sorry. So the question
Yeah,
is,
sorry, I can repeat the question. It's just
yeah.
what kind of education do you think should be happening, at a younger, more developmental age with athletes, so that they feel safe to advocate for themselves, whether that's, because they're in an unsafe environment with a coaching situation, or any other reason that they might need to be able to speak up, and creating an environment that's safe for athletes to speak up without fearing retaliation.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I believe the onus is not just on the athlete to create that environment, and especially a young athlete, say someone who's a minor. So I think that kind of education is happening with coaches and parents as well. And I know that is something that is definitely happening. I spoke earlier about what the athlete goes through with the background checks and the e-learning and things like that annually. And the same is happening for coaches as well. And I think parents as well. It's so important to empower young athletes, to let them understand that they have ultimately the power to say no, the power to listen to their own bodies, the autonomy to decide if they're the ones who want to step on the ice that day and chase that dream. I think maybe it can be easy to fall into a pattern of tying your success to your child skating or to your student skating. But I think we need to go away from that model, and we need to really detach ourselves from the success of a young skater, and want the best for the skater, and also push the skater in a safe and healthy way to achieve what they want and to grow into the skater and the person that they're capable of being. But I think the skater needs to always be in the driver's seat, and that includes young skaters too. And we're not just talking about when you're 16 and you get the keys to the car. I mean, when you first start skating, I think we need to ask the athletes and really listen to the athletes more and more.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, because it's definitely something that, like anything else that's developmental, you grow in your ability to sort of recognize and advocate for yourself as you grow up, but that's something that has to be developed as you go. When you mentioned background checks, is that U.S. figure skating that you're speaking about in that regard?
Yes. So I'm not sure if that's a global thing, but U.S. figure skating for sure is doing annual background checks and a full registration process at the start of every year. And that's something that I think 10 years ago we weren't doing that kind of thing, at least in my memory. And so I think that kind of progress that's being made is very encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, this just in the topic of safeguarding, it's been really interesting to understand how different procedures and also just cultures around it are in different parts of the skating world. And not that the US safe sport is necessarily functioning as well as it should be either, but that there are many fewer protections in a lot of parts of the world. And so it's something that I've been trying to understand a little bit more, sort of where the ISU's role is in being an extra level of that, of perhaps providing education, but also is there a role for the ISU in stepping into situations or advocating on behalf of skaters or helping them to navigate these what can be very complicated and traumatizing situations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is, kind of a new frontier in the sense that, the organization is, I'm not exactly sure, but it's relatively new. And I think like in order for it to really succeed, it needs to be independent and work as an independent body. And I think it's difficult to understand sometimes because we're not privy to all of the details of what goes on. And so I think that there needs to be like an inherent trust of, okay, this is a body that is here to safeguard athletes. We want them to do the right thing. But at the same time, like, we're not really privy to a lot of the information or the specifics of these cases, nor should we be. But at the same time, I think, some kind of overlap and some kind of working in concert with our bigger organizations is also something that should happen.
It's interesting to see with some of the safe sport questions that there are the funding for safe sport that comes from the federations, and so there's a disincentive perhaps for federations to report cases to safe sport, and some of those things that are at a very structural level that hopefully can be fixed in the future. But this is certainly something that's been on my mind, watching even just in the last couple of weeks as we're recording this fall, that there have been some pretty horrible situations coming forward, and that people's experiences, skaters' experiences. So it's certainly something that feels urgent from a fan perspective, and I think I would assume probably feels like a fairly urgent issue from an athlete's perspective as well.
100%. Like, I can't even tell you how much change has occurred over the course of my career, and I think this is one of the biggest aspects of change that we've seen is like, at least there is this organization that is the intention of which is to protect the athletes. And, I think gone are the days of like, oh, it's this or it's that. That's just the way it is. That's just skating culture. It's like, no, actually, we can shape the culture of our sport moving forward by listening to the athletes, by developing these organizations that are well-intentioned. And maybe there is some tweaking that needs to be done with the way that it works. But I think at least progress is being made. I don't think progress is linear. I know it's not linear. And so I think we need to continue to build on what has already been created and done moving forward and continue to give our feedback. And that's another role of the Athletes Commission, just, communicating the message from the skater to the ISU about what we think is best.
On a slightly different topic, is there a space for athlete feedback when it comes to the question of when or if it's appropriate for Russian and Belarusian skaters to return to competition?
I mean, that has not really been a topic of conversation for the athletes. I think that's really a decision that's going to be made by the IOC and the ISU. I think it's just sports and politics are, I think, inherently linked. And you've talked about this on your previous episodes about when it comes to government-funded sports or, sports that are not for profit. Each country is different, and each country has a different kind of political implication with their federation and their political bodies. I skate for a country that is no government funding and not associated with the government. That's not true for other countries. And so it's a really tricky situation where, world politics and things that are going on far outside of the ice rinks are having a really lasting, impactful impact on what's happening with the skaters. And So that hasn't been something that's been talked about at the skater level, but I think time will tell.
Yeah, no, I think it's something that even if it's not the ultimately deciding factor, it certainly would be interesting to understand where different skaters feel about that question. And there's the stated reasons for the ban in terms of the war in Ukraine, and then there's also the anti-doping question, which feels very relevant but hard, but is not officially part of the decision making around that. So there's a couple of complicated pieces to go into there. It seems like there's been less trust recently coming from the U.S. in particular toward the World Anti-Doping Agency, and where the role is for that agency in keeping clean sport. I know you were interested at one point in working more closely with WADA, and I'm curious what you think the direction that the anti-doping world should be going as well.
I was interested in I did run actually for the opening for the Athletes Commission for WADA, but I wasn't successful. But I think, again, back to this experience in Beijing, it really opened my eyes to a lot more of what's happening structurally in the world of international sport. And I was kind of naive to all of that earlier in my career, maybe because I didn't have a reason to really study and look at what's really going on. But I think I've been subject to whereabouts filings and doping tests since I was a teenager, since I became a member of Team USA. And I think that is a right and a responsibility that comes with being an elite athlete, saying you are going to be where you're going to be, and allowing doping officers to come and knock on your front door and, take samples and hold you to the highest standard. And I think we're talking about maintaining the integrity of sport. And these anti-doping bodies are so integral in maintaining the integrity of sport. And then think integrity of the sport is all that we have at the end of the day. I think all the athletes who work their whole lives to reach an Olympic level deserve to have an even playing field when they get there. And the trust needs to come from knowing that all the athletes around the world are subject to the same exact types of requirements that we are in our country. And so I know that there are people who are working hard to maintain that kind of justice in the world. And I really am so thankful for those kinds of people.
Yeah, I was shocked when I realized that the whereabouts testing was not universal, and that just how different the regimes are in different parts of the world, that when everyone is competing in the same competitions. Once I started looking into it, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is how this works. But I think that I had assumed prior to that everyone was functioning the way the US was, and that's definitely not the case.
And I think leading by example is the best thing that we can do in this case. Like, we can't have oversight over every single country in the world and the way that those athletes are being treated. But leading by example is something that I really believe in. And I'm really proud of the way that U.S. figure skating has developed over the last few years. And USADA as well has been, I think, a leader in the anti-doping movement.
You mentioned previously one of the topics that came up among the athletes was about prize money. And I was curious about that. In a lot of spaces, sort of athlete representation is in the form of having athlete unions, and in professional sports, that's a big role, is trying to advocate for fair compensation. And like in figure skating, that's a much tinier thing, but nonetheless, it's still important. So is there anything you could say about that issue?
I think it's a very popular issue amongst the athletes that is discussed. We need to make a living, and we are in a sport that is quite expensive. And so I think, it's difficult because really only the top percentage of athletes who are really succeeding at the Grand Prix and world level, and who are also being invited to ice shows in the off season, are really able to, make a comfortable living from skating. And so many athletes that I talk to are going to the ice rink and coaching after they're done training or before they're training. So many athletes are going to school in addition to training so that they might have opportunities to work another job to fund their training. And I think it goes back to growing our sport, to getting more fans into the arenas, to, getting more lucrative TV contracts, to just expanding our budget as a sport, as a sport entity, and then from there, letting that trickle down to the athletes and hoping that more athletes will get a slice of the pie.
Yeah, I mean, certainly growing the resources is a big piece of that. One thing I was curious about, you were part of the documentary that the Olympics Channel did before Beijing, looking at the teams at IM, and it seems like there's at least some interest from the ISU in trying to do more of that kind of behind the scenes documentary. And from what they said at Congress, that maybe some athletes are a little nervous about the idea of a behind the scenes, somebody following them with the camera in their training, like maybe not so much of an appealing idea. And so I'm curious about your experience with filming that documentary, and B, what kinds of opportunities you think might work for figure skating in terms of like communicating the story off the ice as well to a broader audience.
Yeah, so I mean, I had a great experience doing that it wasn't on Netflix, doing the Olympic Channel documentary. But some of these Netflix documentaries that have come out in the last few years, whether it's The Drive to Survive, which, Formula One was already popular, but I feel like it really took it to the next level. Simone's new documentary, which has come out on Netflix, has been a huge success and has elevated gymnastics. And I feel like that would be amazing if we could get something like that for figure skating that could really tell the athletes' stories. I think a lot of what has been coming out behind the research that the ISU has been doing and trying to tap into what exactly the fans want to see is that they want to see the backstory of the athlete almost as much as they want to see what the athlete's doing on the ice. I mean, it's equally important, right? Like, we want to see the story of how that athlete made it to that point, and we want to feel invested in their journey through the way. And if we can have a wonderful documentary that's really professional and looks great and can shine a light on the athletes, we should absolutely do that. And so I'm hopeful that something will come along in the next 12 months or 18 months before the next Olympic Games, because I feel like there are some incredible athletes whose stories deserve to be told.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I feel very privileged about, getting to be a journalist and getting to know some of the athletes and to be in those backstage moments and in the mix zone. And it's something that's made my appreciation of the sport so much stronger. Even when I'm watching people now, I have the difficult choice between do I go to the mix zone or do I actually watch the performances? I realized I didn't see either of your performances at Skate America live. I was watching them on the TV backstage and only saw the practices. So that's the trade-off. But for an audience at home, hopefully then they can get pieces of that experience and getting to know more about the athletes especially coming into an Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, the people in figure skating are the best part of figure skating. In my experience, it's about the relationships that we make. It's about the people that we meet along the way. And I feel so strongly about that. It's really about how you treat other people. And I get questions so often about how do you train with your competitors? Or you guys all train in Montreal, are you friends? And I'm yeah, absolutely we're friends, because I have so much respect for every athlete that puts in the work to go out, to get to that level, to be able to stand on the ice with confidence, with their training done. I know what goes into it, and it's not easy. And I think it builds so much character, and you learn to win and you learn to lose, and you learn to navigate these ups and downs and stress and self-belief and self-doubt and all of it. And I think it just really molds people into unique kinds of people that I think are worth knowing and worth supporting.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great point. And I think there's an outdated image, I think, of who a figure skater is, or something that maybe, especially if like in the US, it's very, stuck in an idea from the 80s and 90s. And it's really great when we can see the diversity of people that are in the sport and all different kinds of personalities, all different kinds of diversity.
100%.
All different kinds of personalities.
100%. Like representation matters. And, like we're talking about athlete stories, and like, yes, we want it to be an amazing Netflix documentary, but also like you can go on Instagram and you can follow some of these incredible athletes who are unique and different, and who aren't just like a cookie cutter version of what you might have been told a figure skater was like 20 years ago,
My last question for you is, thinking about your career, you've had obviously a long and successful career. And as you're thinking about supporting athletes to be able to continue to compete as long as they want to be able to compete from a financial and a health perspective, and then find opportunities that come after that, I'm curious about what you draw on from your own experience that's allowed you to have this career longevity, and what you'd like to see for other athletes.
That is a good question. I feel very blessed to be an ice dancer, because if I was jumping quads, I wouldn't be still competing at my age. I think just the support for the athletes is the most important thing that will hopefully allow them to skate as long as they want to. That support comes from member federations like US Figure Skating. That support comes from the ISU. The support comes from the Athletes Commission, from the skaters' family, from the coaches. I think just the development and the movement towards caring about athlete well-being is the way forward. And the more that we can continue to do to, build that athlete up, create the most robust system for an athlete to deal with the natural pitfalls that come with a career in sports, and allow them to bounce back, to keep a positive attitude, to understand that skating is what you do, it's not who you are. You might have a bad competition, it doesn't make you a bad person. And I think that kind of sentiment is what we should share with skaters moving forward, and just allow them to feel empowered to skate as long as they want to.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Evan. I'm very interested to continue, following the work that you do and the work of the Athletes Commission. I think it's one of the bright spots that we're seeing in the figure skating world right now. And so thank you again for sharing. Thanks again to Evan for speaking with me. You can find the transcript and links to the things we talked about in the show notes and description. You can follow Evan on Instagram at Evan_Bates. You can reach me with comments or suggestions by email at fsfuturepodcast@gmail.com, or on Instagram and Blue Sky at FutureFSPodcast. If you appreciate the podcast, you can also support my work with the tip jar at futureoffigureskating.pinecast. Remember to subscribe to the Future of Figure Skating on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts, and share it with your friends.